Hey, this is Hunter Turnbow, and I'm so excited you joined us for this podcast today. I believe that God designed you for such a time as this, and I hope that you can leave encouraged and empowered. Welcome to Corner Talk. What is going on, everyone? It is so good to be back on Corner Talk. I'm super excited for today, and yes, I did say super excited. Shout out to my dad who wanted to roast me on his very first episode on here. So I'm super excited that episode was super. Very, very super. But I'm excited today. We have a guest. He is one of my best friends, someone that has ministered to me in seasons that I've went through. And then just someone that I've been able to walk alongside, getting to know him better, someone that's been there for me in the best days and someone who's been there for me in the worst days. And so without further ado, let me introduce to you, he is our South Campus worship pastor, one of my best friends, Christian Caldwell.
What's going on, everybody?
Dude, I think like everyone else, I mean, because we've done a podcast before, but this is on the nice setup.
Yes, it is.
It is not like a ghetto setup.
Yeah, with the microphone in the middle, you have to talk loud enough so it can hear us both.
And you can hear the echo in the room and everything. Mm-hmm. The only bad thing is about where we're at right now with the setup. We were actually adjusting the mics, and the table that the mics are on nearly fell over and collapsed. Yeah. So our nice setup almost just wasn't so nice anymore.
Yeah. It's nice. I like it.
It's nice. I like it. No, I am excited to have you on the podcast today. Me and you both just got off of a sabbatical, several months ago. And so, and we had a lot of time that we spent together where we both got to minister to each other in different ways. But then just also getting to hear your story and the whole reason about why you were taking your sabbatical. And let me say this for everyone that's out there listening, because maybe you're not in ministry. Regardless if you're in ministry or not, sometimes taking that break away from the day-to-day things and getting away and allowing the Lord to speak to you is 100% necessary. Yep. And so that's really what a sabbatical is taking a break. I get it that it's a little bit different in the secular world, but for ministry and pastors, we take this break called a sabbatical. And what it is we're not doing any ministry. We're just going to sit down and get ministered to. We're not going to be at the church. The only time we're going to be at the church maybe on a Sunday, and that's just to sit down and listen. Is that the best way to explain it?
Yeah, in service, just to get poured into. With all the pouring out that you do in ministry, even not just in front of people, but just preparing to speak in front of people, or preparing to lead worship, or preparing just to do offering. If you're a volunteer that got asked to step up and do offering, there's a lot of pouring out that goes into that and being prepared for it. So just taking a time and a season to sit back and really figure out, God, what is your direction for this next season, for where you're taking us? You always are growing spiritually, and if you're not growing, then you're dying, and rest is important to that. And God did that in creation from the very 100%. Beginning. He shows us how important rest is. Yeah, to just sit back and not have to be creative, not have to be leading, not having to do any of that, and just getting to be. Right.
And sometimes these seasons of rest are brought up by certain, circumstances. Number one, it's never something to send us away nearly as in like a prison. It's not necessarily a way to do that. Sometimes it's just really, I need to sit down, reevaluate, but also allow the Lord to restore me, heal me, speak to me in this moment, no matter what season you're in. Maybe you are in a season of, I'm just drained. I want to encourage you, go and rest. Take a vacation.
Absolutely.
Go do something. But in today's episode, the reason that I brought Christian on board is Christian just walked through a season. I'm going to let him get into it, but to talk about his testimony, what this past season has looked like for him, and then being able to come out on the other side, knowing who he is, that certain circumstances didn't change his calling, didn't change who he was, that he still had purpose, he still had destiny. So, Christian, go ahead, take it away, my man.
Yeah, man. For me personally, my sabbatical, if you can even really call it that, for me, I think a lot of pastors get to a point where they get tired and they choose to take a sabbatical on their own. I don't want to say that I was forced into doing one, but I had just been walking my own path, trying to do things my own way. And because of that, my vision was clouded. I couldn't lead from a full heart perspective. I had 1 foot in, 1 foot out.
Yeah.
And so I had a lot of restoration that had to happen in my life to be able to jump back onto the calling, that God had given me, and the place that he wanted to take me, and how he wanted me to do my ministry, whatever that had looked like. So I just had to take some time back because I was dealing with some things personally that I needed to get fixed, that I needed to get healing from. And so it was more of a step back for restoration than it was a true sabbatical. But in that, just getting to rest and get to be, I feel like a lot of times in ministry, we have a not a slave mindset, but I feel like a lot of ministers, a lot of people who are in ministry are the older brother in the prodigal son story, where it's like, God, but look at everything that I've done. Look at what I've been doing, and this, and this. And it's not that that's not important. It's just when somebody comes back home, that's just an exciting time in heaven. So to keep working and doing all the stuff is great. I'm not telling you to stop and just not do anything, or else your ministry could fall apart. There is a lot of work that has to go into it. But if you don't get rest, if you don't have that time to do that, that's where your mentality is. Now your identity is wrapped up in all the stuff that you're doing and not just being a child of God.
Yeah.
So
no, that's deep. I mean, that's you pretty much just dropped the mic. I don't know what to say. Continue.
So for me, I was just dealing with some stuff. I was leading worship. I was preaching, helping out on the creative team. I kind of had my hand in a lot of different ministries, making graphics and doing things like that. But outside of church, I was having sex outside of marriage and getting into just some things that I was not supposed to be getting into. So being 25 years old, it was fun. And so there was just some things that I needed to get healing from.
Right.
And so I had to take a step back, and I'm just so thankful now to this day of the grace, that God has, but not only
100%.
that God has, but my leadership has that. And that's what I would say too, is I'm trying to remember which pastor says that. I think it's Pastor Robert Morris. And I listened to your episode with PT, and y'all quoted Craig Rochelle a lot. So it was nice. But he says, I'm trying to remember, and I hope I don't butcher it, but grace without truth is meaningless, and truth without grace is mean.
Yeah.
And so being able to find a balance, and that's why I got set down. I was like, hey, listen, what you're doing is not okay. And because of that, and that's truth, and it's absolutely true. But this is the grace side of things, and this is what we're going to do. It's going to be up to you and how you choose to walk through and how you choose to handle it. But this is what we're going to do. And so it was a hard time, not going to lie. It felt really lonely at places.
Sure.
But there was times as a worshiper, I always like to compare my life to David. Just,
Yeah.
He's a worshiper. He still had his mistake, but he was known after a man after God's own heart. And then I was sitting there walking through the season and just going day to day and not really knowing what was going to happen. And I just really felt, I was like, God, I don't really feel like David anymore. I feel more like Rahab.
Yeah.
And so in that, there was just a lot of shame. Like after the first couple weeks of when everything kind of blew up, it was hard for me to walk into church because I knew that there was going to be people who knew the whole story and knew everything that was, everything that had happened and what was going on. And I knew that I was just going to look that different. So it was so hard to even walk into church. And being a pastor's kid, that was the first time in my life that it's ever been that hard to walk into a church building.
Yeah.
But because of that, there was a lot of things that I kept behind closed doors.
Sure.
That didn't share with anybody. And so it just made that shame just creeped in, and shame is such everybody deals with it. I think there's so many different sins and stuff and PT says this all the time. He says, you have grace for the people who sin like you.
Yeah.
And so everybody deals with their own things, but shame is one of those things that I feel like everybody deals with.
Right.
Everybody deals with shame. It might be in different aspects, but everybody deals with it. And so for me, it was so hard for me to walk into a church building knowing that there was people who knew what I had done, and wasn't really sure if they were going to accept me now that they knew what was behind
100%
closed doors.
Yeah. Two things that I want to ask you, and then two, maybe you can speak into this a little bit, because I'm going to ask you the first one, and I want to see what your thoughts are on the second one. The first one, you were saying you're talking about grace and truth. Mm-hmm. And it was in that moment, in your darkest moment, your loneliest moment, already knowing I did wrong, I messed up, but then having someone to come and confront you on the mistake. Mm-hmm. How do you keep yourself from getting to a place of growing offended versus being able to receive the help that's trying to get? Does that make sense what I'm saying? I think sometimes we get so caught up, and if we're not careful, we'll try to justify what was being done,
right,
rather than realizing this was a mess up, and it's not the person's being mean, it's not the person's trying to hate on me, it's this person loves me enough to call me out on it to help me get back to restoration. So how do you get your heart open to be able to receive rather than to react?
Yeah, honestly, I feel like that's why we here at TWC, we say we don't do life alone. It's a relationship aspect. If I didn't have the relationship that I did with the people who came and were speaking into my life, me personally, I might have received it different. What they were saying isn't wrong, but because it was coming from that source makes it different. So having a relationship, and that's why I say it's important to find people that you trust enough to speak into your life. And for me, I realized like there were certain things that I was doing. There's nothing wrong. It was my decisions. I chose to do it, so I was doing it. And because of that, this is one saying that kind of kept me going through this, is that you forfeit more potential than the devil will ever steal from you.
Come on.
And so I feel like there's times that we go through certain things and we like to, it was the enemy. Like, and we just blame it. It's like, no, it wasn't the enemy. I just chose to do what I was doing.
Right.
And it was me. And in doing that, I forfeited so much more potential. And that's what I said. The potential that I could have been leading at is so much higher if I had everything in it. Right. If I was all the way in. And so to answer your question, having relationships with those and allowing those people to be able to speak into your life, if you're okay with receiving a prophetic word for them because you have that kind of relationship, then they've earned the right to tell you when you're doing something wrong.
Right.
We had the conversation of there's so many people who have so many yes friends who are just like, hey, I want to do this. What do you think? And they're like, yes, absolutely. Go ahead. Whatever you want to do. Yeah. And I feel like the world is like that right now. Where it's just like, however you feel, whatever you want to do, you go do it. Absolutely. And to an extent, that's okay. But we also need to have some people surrounded in our lives around us that say, hey, listen, no, that's not beneficial for you. Right. And not only is it not beneficial for you, but what you're doing can affect so many other people.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. That's deep, because sometimes I think in those moments, you're 100% right. I think a lot of times we look at we want to say the Christian-y, we want to say the right Christian thing and say, well, the enemy got me. Mm-hmm. No, you just opened up a door that shouldn't have been opened.
Right.
Well,
absolutely.
Hunter, that's harsh. Is it though? Mm-hmm. Because it's in those moments when you have those people in your life. I'll be real with you. Like, I had a moment this past year where Amanda Hill, she's one of my spiritual mamas, and we had a disagreement, and it wasn't so much that she was wrong. It's just that I didn't like hearing that. And it's not that she was attacking my character. It was more so of, I need to expose this to you so that you can get to a point where you see it, so you're able to receive the healing that God's trying to bring.
Yeah.
So I 100%, like, I love that you brought that up, because we have to be real with ourselves. In order to receive that true restoration and healing, we've got to be real and vulnerable with ourselves. Yeah. Wouldn't you say so?
Yeah, absolutely. That's why they say when you're dealing with addiction, the first step is denial.
100%.
Like when you have an addiction, you don't admit that you have an addiction, and that's why it's an addiction.
Right.
And so it's not until you can really, truly, like, growing up in Sunday school, you say your ABCs for the prayer, and the first one is you have to accept that you are a sinner.
Yeah.
And so if you ever want somebody to be able to speak into your life, knowing that what you're doing is wrong, you can come up with all the excuses that you want, but you're never going to get healed from it if you're doing that. You first have to accept, like, yes, I am wrong. So now what do I need to do to get better?
100%. So then going back to the other part of my question, and maybe you can do perspective from both sides, however you feel fit. Mm-hmm. But I think in the world that we live in today, and especially if you've ever listened to any of my sermons that I've preached, you may have heard me say that if we're not careful, the church is turning more and more into a cult every single day. And the whole reason for that being is us as Christians, sometimes I feel like we forget where we came from. And so if you don't look like us, you don't sound like us, you don't act like us, then you're not welcome to come into the church.
Right.
And I think we forget, before Jesus, we all have a past. And even after Jesus, we still mess up. We still have mistakes. So who are we to judge when really we're called not to be a Pharisee, but to be a follower? And following Jesus means showing that same grace and mercy that he shows us to other people. So being on both sides of it, how are you able with guilt and shame? Because that's one thing that a lot of us have struggled with, that act as weights that hold us down from ever being able to receive that healing.
Right.
So how do you get to a place, and maybe you answered it in the previous answer, but how do you get to a place where you got bold enough and confident enough again to step into the church? And then 2, being on the other side of it, maybe we say, man, maybe that is me. Maybe I have judged someone.
Yeah.
Maybe I forgot where I came from. And maybe there's been seasons of my life where someone's reached out for help, but rather than showing them grace and mercy, in fact, I just pushed them away.
Right.
So on both sides, 1, how did you build up the confidence to step into church again? Mm-hmm. And then 2, for that person that maybe has judged and they're like, I just now recognize this and I want to fix this. How do I fix that? So 2-part question, but
yeah, for me, I don't know if there was any confidence in wanting to like step back into church. I don't know if that's the right word that I would use. What for me personally, just with where I was at, when I would walk in and seeing people that I had saw before, that I did life with before, and I would walk into church and seeing that they still accepted me, really is what gave me the confidence in wanting to come back.
Yeah.
Because there was conversations like that first Sunday, I just stood in the back. I didn't go sit down. I just stood in the back. And if you knew what was going on, you kind of watched the slow progression from standing in the back to sitting in the middle to now back to sitting in the front. It was just like that. But having conversations, I never once had a conversation with somebody saying like, hey, just tell me what I need to do so I can get back to doing what I was doing. Because if you do that, there's no healing in that.
Right.
And so I was never given a timeline for anything. It was just like, hey, we want to see that you're growing. We want to see, that you're getting healed. So this is what we're going to do. Like, here's some things that you need to do. Come to church, be there, sit on the front row. You're a worshiper, so be there. That title, that as a worshiper, you are still, no matter how far you've messed up, no matter how far you've walked down the wrong path, you are still a child of God. Yeah. And if you can worship that way, or you can speak that way, or you can preach that way from a pulpit, are you still doing it when you don't have a microphone in your hand? And so, that was something for me that I was just like, man, like, if I really am getting better, why does my worship look different?
Yeah.
Now it just looks like it's fake because I'm standing in the back and not doing what. And so knowing and seeing people that would come up and be like, hey, Christian, how you doing? Like, it's been a while since I've seen you. Like, what's going on? And having conversations with those people who I know that knew a little bit of what was going on, but still seeing that I was accepted changed everything. Like, I really understand. At first I didn't. I always thought it was like, oh, he's cool. Like, we're like the prodigal son's coming home. Like, we're going to have food, like, hang out. I'm like, okay, that's an awesome story. But if you remember what he asked, he was like, I don't want any of this. I just want to come back home. So if I have to work for it, I don't need to be in the house with you. I can work for it. But what I was doing isn't good enough for me anymore. So I'll just work for it. And he says, no, you are my son. There's nothing that you have to do to work for it. And if you ask for timelines when you're dealing with restoration, that's what you're doing. Right. You're working for a position back, and that's not what we're asked to do. He just wants to heal you. He just wants to touch you. And so there's a very big difference between guilt and shame. Shame is a weapon that the enemy likes to use because it keeps you exactly where you're at. When you feel guilty about something, it's actually really healthy to really say like, man, I've messed up. I did this. Like, what do I need to do? How do I fix this? Guilt leads to great conversations where shame keeps things in the dark.
Right.
And so for restoration, like if you really want to get better and you're really choose like, man, I really messed up. It's going to take you being okay to expose some things to the light. 100%. And that's why I love the story of Rahab, because if you read that story in Joshua, it talks about the spies coming in and she was a prostitute. So you know that back in those days, everything that she did, she didn't go to work. Her work was at home. So when the spies came in, they knocked on the door and she's just thinking that she's welcoming in the first customers of the night.
Yeah.
Because she was open for business. And what she let into her house was the presence of God. And from that day forward, things changed in her life. Because when you let the presence of God come in your life, if you really break down the story, and I got to preach a message on this, I'm getting excited talking about it again. But she was a prostitute. So what would happen is people would come and knock on the door. She would let them in, and then they would leave with a little piece of her every single time, every single time. But when God shows up, when Jesus shows up, he doesn't just come into your life. The spies in the story representing the presence of God, they were godly men. They came in, but they didn't leave the same way that they came, because they went out the window. When you allow the true presence of God, he doesn't just come into your life, he moves through your life.
Come on.
Because they came through the door and then out through the window. And so when you're dealing with things that you know you need to get restoration from, and you're dealing with shame, because shame can't even look you in the eye.
Right. When
you deal with shame, you have conversations, your head is down, and you can't make eye contact with who you're talking to because you've done something and it's shameful, and it's a weapon that you can still pick up.
Right.
It's something that it's always going to be there. It's like a piece of clothing on the rack that you can pick up and you can wear it. And I wore it for a majority of my life. But once you take it off, you're not too far that you can't just go pick it up again.
Right.
And so allowing the presence of God in your life and going through your life leads you to an open window where what signified shame, God is working on. And I love how the story ends, because if you know red light district, where that term came from is they would hang scarlet red cords on their door to let people know, like, I'm open for business.
Yeah.
And it was that same cord that she would hung that represented her greatest shame, that she hung in the window, that brought her salvation.
Come on.
Because when the spies came back up, they came through the window, and that's how they recognized it, because they saw that cord like, hey, look, there's the sign. And so what represented the greatest shame, because she allowed somebody in to know everything that was going on, and knowing that they invited the presence of God in, and then they used that sign that represented shame and hosted it up in the window as a sign, like, hey, this is how you come in. This is where you can come. And it represented her salvation, but not only hers, but her whole entire family.
Come on.
And isn't that not the same representation of Jesus? God saw, what is the thing that can bring the most shame at that time? What is the thing that brings the most shame? And at the time, it was the cross.
Yeah.
But now we don't look at a cross and think of the horrificness of what crucifixion was. We look at it as a sign of salvation.
Come on.
Because that's what God does. He takes things that are shameful, things that the world doesn't look at, things that the world says is disgusting and gross, and he says, I'm going to turn it around and I'm going to make it for good. And when I do, it's going to be done.
Yeah.
It's done.
Yeah.
So
you just dropped a whole bomb. I mean, honestly. Wow. I mean, in that, maybe someone's out there listening today. What's the first step? If I'm struggling with this, I completely messed up. Mm-hmm. I hear you.
Yeah.
And I know God's good God. Mm-hmm. What's my first step? How do I fix this? What do I need to do? What does this look like?
Yeah. Well, I listened to the vision episode of your podcast. That's why we're doing this. That's why it's called Corner Talk. The first step is finding somebody and letting them in.
Yeah.
You can't fight stuff. You can't fight shame on your own.
Right.
you will be drowned in it. Not saying that God can't come in and work with you on that, because that's putting God in a box. But the first step is to let somebody in.
Yeah.
Somebody that you trust.
Right.
Somebody who has earned the right to speak into your life.
Yeah.
And that's why when you told me that this was your vision for the podcast, this is what you were going to call it, and you're like, hey, you want to jump on? Like, what do you want to talk about? I was like, shame. Because if we're talking, it's corner talk. That's the reason why we're doing it, is to help people out. Like, hey, you have people in your corner.
Right.
And you will never have somebody in your corner if you don't go out and seek somebody to be in your corner.
Yeah.
It's not like people are just going to show up and be like, I got your back, and they have, like, you have no idea who they are. They don't know who you are. It doesn't happen that way. So getting somebody that you trust and has earned the right to speak into your life, get them in your corner.
Yeah.
That is the first step, because that's having people in my life who are able to speak life into me that I could turn to and be like, hey, like, I'm struggling with this again, or I don't feel adequate enough to even be here. And they can say, I understand that's what you're feeling, but that's a lie. That's not truth. And to really have somebody in your corner is the biggest first step.
Right. Well, and realize, don't grow suspicious in your relationships.
Right.
There's a lot of people, and I think as pastors' kids, you'll be able to relate with this too. And it's kind of same topic, but it kind of talks on the side of relationships. I sometimes I've struggled with, a lot of people will tell you, well, I love you, and I love you, and I love you, and I love you. And then you find out real quick the ones who actually love you whenever you're going through something bad.
Right.
You find out the ones that loved you to get something from you,
right,
not to pour into you. And in relationships, regardless if that's marriage, if that's dating, if that's just a friendship.
Yeah.
Regardless, you should both be pouring into each other.
Right.
No matter the circumstance. And I think sometimes it's real. There's people in the world who will tell you their story. You have to be very, very, very careful with this. Like what Christian was saying, like, find these people that you can trust with your life. And I'm not just talking about the kind of trust of, I'm going to tell you the little stuff. I'm talking about the things that you can really get down in the dirt and say, I am struggling with this. Maybe that's a life or death situation. I don't know. But what you're going to find is that there's going to be some people, and I hate that this is how the world is. They will tell you their story so that you feel as if you can tell them your story. Mm-hmm. And then they want to take your story and use it against you.
Right.
Will you talk real quick? I know we're running out of time, on the difference between discernment and suspicion.
Yeah. So when you deal with something in your life and you're going through something, it seems in certain people that you just become suspicious of. You're just like, based off what you've known, based off what you've been told, all that kind of stuff. Sometimes you can look at people and it just comes, it's just suspicious. You're just like, I don't really know. And that's not true. I feel like a lot of relationships fail, and not just dating relationships or marriage relationships. I'm just talking about friendships or just relationships that you have with people. They fail based off of suspicion.
Yeah.
And it's, I thought that this is how you were going to react, or I thought that this is the kind of person that you were. But discernment says, man, if that's true, how can I help better that?
Right.
How can I help you walk through it? How can you help me walk through it? Like, is it true? And I think you said it best. We had a whole conversation. We got to go to Houston, about that. It's, I don't know. It's a really hard balance, and it's a fine line, and you have to be very careful. And really the best way to do it is just have the Holy Spirit inside of you to know that that's the biggest thing. That's why when Jesus left, he said, I am giving you a companion that is always going to be with you. Always will be with you. And so having the Holy Spirit and praying and living a life of prayer, because when you live a life of prayer, you're going to be able to discern which voice is talking to you.
Right.
Is this Jesus? Is this my own thoughts? Is this the enemy trying to speak wrong things and negative things into my life? If you're not living a life of prayer, you're not going to know what his voice sounds like when he's speaking to you. So living a life of prayer is super important, so you can discern those different voices that go on in your head. Because sometimes in my own life, my voice has been louder than his voice. And so when your voice is louder than his voice, you need to stop talking.
Honestly, though,
Yeah, for real.
I mean, and the whole reason that I bring it up, maybe you're wondering, Hunter, this is a conversation about how do I get healing from shame? How do I get healing from my blow up? The whole reason that I bring up relationships and discernment and suspicion is because he's 100% right. Mm-hmm. You cannot do this on your own.
Yeah.
If you could do it on your own, then you wouldn't be in the situation you're in.
Absolutely.
You know, and that's hard to hear, but it's a reality of it. And the reason that we say that is, number one, if we're going to call this podcast Corner Talk, then we're going to get into the real stuff.
Right.
We're going to talk about the hard things because that's what you need in your life. Those people in your corner that you can fully trust to speak. You've given them the ability to speak into your life, regardless if it sounds a little mean. At the end of the day, you need to make sure that your heart's in a place to receive, not in a place to grow offensive.
Yeah.
Or to grow an offense.
Yeah. You have to be okay with somebody being able to see all your ugliness.
Yeah.
Like when you have, back in the Bible, you talk about leprosy. That was evident. Like you could see that somebody was dealing with it, and it was contagious. And so that from far off, they had to yell, unclean, 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 unclean. So that way nobody would get around them. And then just the story with the leprous man who broke rank and decided, like, I know I'm supposed to yell unclean, but I'm going to show up because I know that this Jesus guy, that everything that I've heard about, he can heal me. And that's the biggest thing is leprosy back then is a model for what sin does now. When you're in sin and you're living in his shame, it's ugly, it's gross.
Right.
And there was times that I was just like, I can't go near people because I'm unclean. Unclean, unclean. I didn't want to shout that out, you know?
Right.
But that's why I love, when everything first happened, I sat down and we were actually the worship team was having a team night that Monday following, and Pastor Todd and Pastor Shane wanted me to go and explain why I was stepping back and all that stuff. And I got there a little bit later and I texted PT. I was like, hey, I'm here. Can I come in? And I loved his response because he texted me back and he said, yeah, you're not a leper. Just because you're dealing with stuff doesn't mean that you're contagious. Yeah. You're not a leper.
Come on. Jesus
came down and he died for our sins, right, and he left them in the grave. And so if you're feeling shame, it's because you chose to go and pick it up. And you allowed the enemy to talk to you because Jesus already handled that. He already healed it. And so when he died on the cross, he said it was finished. He was looking at you and he said, it's done. Now choose me.
Yeah.
Choose me, walk with me, let me make you clean. That's why he came down and did it.
Yeah.
And, and because of that, he texted me that. I was like, okay, like I'm not contagious. And because of that, I had confidence knowing like, okay, somebody that I had let down because of what I was doing still looked in me and said, hey, listen, you're not contagious. You're not a leper. Come in, be a part of community. Allow me to speak into your life because what I want to speak is healing. What I want to speak is truth. Yeah. And I want to help you walk down through it. So if you're dealing with shame and you're dealing with guilt and all this stuff of things that you've done, find somebody to be in your corner that looks at you and he says, I understand what you do and I know you think it's ugly, but you're not a leper.
Yeah.
Let Jesus in. Let him do his healing work. That's why he came.
Yeah. It doesn't define you. No, yeah. I love it. Well, guys, we are out of time today. Christian, thank you for, that's hard. What you just did was hard.
Yeah.
Thank you for being real. Thank you for being vulnerable. He is absolutely, and I don't know if I've ever told him this, but so everyone in the world knows, Christian is one of my favorite pastors. He's one of my favorite ministers just because of the realness that you're going to get from him. So don't be surprised whenever you get another invite to be on here. But thank you for being real. Thank you for being vulnerable because of your vulnerableness. You know this just as well as I do. That may have just set someone free that is struggling with the same thing.
Yeah.
So thank you for doing that. Well, guys, we are super. Super. No, we're excited just for the continuation of this podcast. We know that this is a podcast that we want everyone to be able to listen to, regardless if you're in church, regardless if you're in the secular world, being a doctor, a teacher, a coach. I don't care what you are. This is real stuff. And so go ahead, make sure that you guys screenshot this, like and share, subscribe, leave a review in the bottom. You never know whose life this may impact. You say, Hunter, I want to be involved somehow. The best way you can be involved right now is by liking and sharing.
Yeah.
Easiest way to do it. So like and share. Be on the lookout for other episodes because there's more great content on the way. Till then, we love you guys. Stay strong out there. Don't be afraid to reach out to someone and ask them to be in your corner. Don't be afraid to reach out to someone and say, I need you. We love you guys, and we'll see you next time.